You're listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, episode number 26, How to Raise a Mindful Eater with Maryann Jacobsen. Do you ever wonder if you're raising a mindful eater? One who pays attention to the food she eats rather than shoveling it in? One who enjoys the experience of eating and who knows when to eat and when to stop? Kids experience distraction, external pressures to eat more or eat less, and are even the subject of parent fears surrounding eating certain foods or eating too much. It's easy for kids to fall down the rabbit hole of mindless eating. I'm Jill Castle, registered dietitian, childhood nutrition expert, and host of the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy kids inside and out. Today, we are talking about kids and their eating, specifically how to raise a mindful eater. I'm delighted to share my guest with you. Maryann Jacobsen is the author of several books, but particularly her new book, How to Raise a Mindful Eater. She's on the show today to give us tools and her tips for raising mindful eaters in a world that tends to be mindless when it comes to eating. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mention over at jillcastle.com/026. That's 026 for episode number 26.
Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey there, welcome back to the Nourished Child Podcast. Welcome to those of you who are my tried and true listeners, and welcome to you if it's your very first time here. Thank you for tuning in and giving this show a try. I have to say, today I'm recording the day after a big snowstorm, and I'm using my stand-up desk. So I feel a little bit odd standing here and talking to you, although it is a little bit more comfortable. I don't feel like my diaphragm is all scrunched and bent over and it's hard to breathe. Sometimes I get a little breathless when I'm talking, but it's a little bit easier. But still, anytime you're trying something new, it's a little weird. So, whoops, see, I just hit my desk. So anyways, today I am interviewing my friend, colleague, and co-author of Fearless Feeding today. Maryann has a new book out. I'm so excited to share that with you and share the interview we had together a few weeks ago. Being a mindful eater isn't easy. Truth be told, I have my good days and my bad days. I know when I've gone too long without food, if I'm working or heavy into a project, my ability to be mindful with eating is low. Hunger takes over, and for me, that's a primary driver. I'm neither slow with eating, nor am I paying much attention. I am just trying to quell that hunger. When I think about raising mindful eaters, I know it's a compilation of how they are raised with feeding, as well as food choices and a host of other input. One of the things I see in my own kids is their ability to stop eating when they are done, regardless of what's on the plate. That is something, personally, I did not learn as a child. As a product of an authoritarian household, German parents, mind you, when it came to eating, I was very much raised with the clean your plate mentality. And because of that, in part, I do still struggle with leaving food on my plate. But I must have done something right because my kids don't seem to struggle with this at all. In fact, they are quite comfortable walking away with food left on their plate. That tells me they have a good foundation and sense of eating for appetite. As our world gets more and more food complicated, it is more and more necessary to have a handle on raising mindful eaters. And that's what my guest Maryann is here to help us with today. But before we get started, let me just go over one big announcement. I am hosting a live webinar next week on Tuesday, March 7th at noon Eastern Standard Time, and on Thursday, March 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The webinar is called 5 Strategies to Help Your Child Eat Healthier. I'll be sending out the details for registering via my email newsletter and on my Facebook page. So if you aren't connected with me there, be sure to sign up for my newsletter or like The Nourished Child on Facebook. Like I said, it's a free training, and I will give plenty of time at the end for questions and answers, so I hope you'll join me. Now let's get on to the good stuff. Maryann Jacobsen is a registered dietitian and author of the books How to Raise a Mindful Eater, From Picky to Powerful, and What to Cook for Dinner with Kids. She is the co-author of Fearless Feeding, How to Raise Healthy Eaters from High Chair to High School. I am very delighted to have her on the podcast today and collaborate with her again. Here's Maryann. Welcome, Maryann. I'm really excited to talk about your book, How to Raise a Mindful Eater.
Thanks, Jill. Glad to be here.
We've been talking about having you join the show for weeks now, of course, with the holidays and the busyness of kids and really the holidays. It's tough to get some of these interviews on the book, so I'm so glad that we are recording now in early January, and it's a perfect time because you just released a brand new book, How to Raise a Mindful Eater. So tell us sort of a little bit about yourself and why you decided to write on this topic.
Well, my blog, Raise Healthy Eaters, I have talked a lot about, obviously, childhood feeding, and I get questions and emails, and I've written, me and you wrote a book, Fearless Feeding, for kids of all ages. And, I wrote a book about picky eating, but one of the books I wanted to really write was on, originally, it is teaching kids moderation and this idea. I get a lot of questions. My most frequent question is, my kid won't stop eating. They don't know when they're full, or they're, fixated or obsessed with sweets. And really, I get that question so much. I just, I knew I wanted to write a book that focused on this area, not just for people that are having struggles, but also to prevent, because we live in this world with food everywhere, and we hear a lot about food addiction, and it can be really scary for parents when, raising their kids. How do you really teach a kid moderation? Can you teach them that? And so that's really where the book, I knew that I wanted that to be my next book, and I've written about it on my blog, but this, most of the book is new content.
And it's great. It's great. I've read it. I've reviewed it. And I totally agree with you. This is an area that keeps coming up in my area of practice as well. And it's not an easy topic to navigate with families. And one of the reasons I think that is because is how you explain it in the book, the food framework versus the mindful framework. Mm-hmm. Tell us about what you mean by those two categories.
Well, the food framework is, so if someone's having a challenge either with their own eating or their kids' eating, we naturally go to food. So let's say a parent, their kid's eating, likes cookies, they may take those cookies away or really be, restrict their intake. When really, that's what's on the surface, the kid's eating cookies. But the mindful framework is when we really think, well, why are they? Why are they eating the cookies? And there could be a lot of different reasons, which the book helps, parents figure out. So, it's not always about the food. Sometimes it is, and food definitely matters, but what else is going on? And we're not really trained, we're not really brought up, or our society, to think that way, to think about all these other factors. And that's, the 8 principles are based on all the different things that can be affecting, why your child's eating a certain way.
Sure. Sure. So yeah, we often, and I think when we were writing Fearless Feeding, we talked a lot about the fact that it's not just about food. There's so much more that goes into it. But when it comes to becoming a mindful eater, in the book, you outline 8 basic principles. Let's go through what those are.
Okay. Just to clarify really quick, my mindful eater is a little different than mindful eater typically. Mm-hmm. Mindful eating is just being present, paying attention without judgment. I define it as someone who eats for nourishment and enjoyment, listens to their body, and naturally eats in moderation due to that. So these 8 principles are really based on helping a child develop a healthy relationship with food. And they're based on kind of 4 key areas. And the first is an internal approach to eating. So a lot of the research is showing, especially for prevention, is that kids and adults that rely on hunger and fullness to guide eating, eat better, they have a healthier relationship with food, and they also prevent unnecessary weight gain. So that's what the first 2 principles focus on. And the plan, prioritize, and structure meals is the first principle. That's important because, we're eating meals at the table. We're not mindlessly eating while we're watching TV or doing other things. And that really helps kids regulate their food intake. It also helps parents, as to structure meals and not have kids always asking us, can I eat this? Can I eat that? And then the second is to allow hunger and fullness to guide eating. So once you structure those meals, then you're at the table. You want to make sure that kids are eating until they're full, that they really understand, like my kids know that. Like they'll say, I'm full. I always have hunger. I always give cues. Are you full? Are you, a lot of times parents might be trying to get their kid to eat more or less. So that can be a problem. So when you have an internal approach to eating, then there's other issues that can come up. It can be hard to maintain because kids, they naturally are drawn to sweets and they may not always, like vegetables, or it takes a while. So this, the principle, neutralize the power of goodies, is my third principle. And that helps parents really make these foods less important to kids. Because in a lot of ways, as you know, the things we do, if we use food as a reward for always nagging them not to eat, then we make them even more, salient in the child's life.
Right.
And so do you want me to go quicker through these?
No, you're doing awesome.
The fourth principle is about making nutrition a rewarding part of eating. So a lot of, we know from research that kids tend to think healthy foods are inferior in taste and that unhealthy foods are, so we need to really be careful on how we teach our kids so that we make nutrition a rewarding part, healthy foods rewarding part of their eating life. And then 5 is to put pleasure at the center of your table. So making sure that, what's the eating environment like? Is it a drag? Is it a negative environment? Is it trying to keep it as positive as possible? And so we forget pleasure is really actually helps us eat better. We actually absorb nutrients when we're enjoying food. So if a kid really, you're making them take bites and they hate they're probably not, absorbing as much as you would like, and it's kind of counterproductive. So that principle is important. And then body appreciation is principle 6, and that's as kids get older. As when they're younger, it may not come up as much, but as they, my daughter's 10 and she's not really there yet, but I'm preparing her. Mm-hmm. They do start to compare their bodies, and they may start to diet. You wouldn't, or think they're too big or too small, or so we really have to work with our kids on appreciating their body, taking care of their body, talking about size diversity, making sure we're helping them with their body image, because that can really turn them into a more extreme eater, something we don't want. And then principle 6 is about stress and dealing with stress, which I think is really important. And all the studies or surveys show that kids are more stressed than parents think. When they each rate, the parents like, oh, I don't think they're that stressed. But then the kid's like, yeah, I'm stressed. And that we know that affects eating. We know that affects a lot of healthy habits, sleep. And so that principle really gets at what we can do to help our kids and ourselves. All of these principles apply to parents too. So, and then the last principle, which, I wasn't sure I was going to add in, but I'm glad that I did, is connecting with our kids. And it's about that emotional and mental happiness. One of the things in dealing with parents that I notice, especially when they're dealing with behavior problems, a child's eating, if their eating's out of control, either they're picky or they're eating too much, it starts to, this invisible wedge comes between the parent and the child. And that only makes the behavior worse. And I actually have had an interview, and me and this mom cried on the phone because when she realized this, that with her son, that it was driving his behavior. She was having trouble connecting with her kid. And she made this change, and it made a world of difference. And it was never about the food. She tried all these things with the food, and it was this connection that ended up really helping him, be able to eat better, have a normal relationship with food. So I think that's often missed, and it's important that we're stay connected with our kids. And it's not always easy with more challenging kids because we're always arguing, or, we all know those kids that are a little more like they push the boundaries more. But it's really important. So, these 8 principles, I think, help parents kind of either prevent or find answers, or maybe there's one that they really need to work on. I have resources in the back so that they can get more help.
It's really great. I think, of those 8 principles, so many of them are very familiar to me just because working in childhood nutrition for so many years that these things have come up. But I totally agree with you on the last principle. When we talk about connection with our kids around food, ideally that starts on day one, and it is probably a lot easier on day one and in those first few years of life to stay connected with your child. And it's probably easier for parents because they feel they have more control. And I think as parents, when they feel they have control, it's easy to connect. Meals are pleasant, but when your child gets older, and we've talked about this in the past, when your child goes out in the big world and has their own starts to develop their own values and preferences and views on things that are oftentimes influenced by their friends or the media or what have you, they are starting to come up with their own voice and their own behaviors at home around food. I see it in my own children. Having 4 kids, I've watched them all go from being great eaters that will eat anything. I've been teasing my son lately, who is 15. He could not eat. He ate so many vegetables. It was his literally favorite food group when he was younger. And now I cannot get him, and I'm not even trying to get him to eat them. But it's interesting how they all go through these phases, and that makes the connection a little bit more challenging because as a parent, you can become very frustrated with your child who's not eating the way you want them to, or, their eating performance is what I like to call it, is not up to par. And it can drive a wedge. It can be very frustrating. And particularly, as you mentioned, those children who might have ADHD or autism or other anxiety disorder. They are much more anxious around food and much pickier than a parent would typically expect. Those children can be challenging, so I really appreciate the fact that you highlight that connection principle because a lot of us parents, we need to keep that in our mind and work on that a little bit harder, particularly as our children get older.
Well, and one thing that was interesting as I was researching was, this developmental need we all have for connection. We're all hardwired, as Brene Brown would say, for connection. And if we don't get that, and the parent and child is so important, then we look for either need substitutes. So maybe we try and get straight A's. We're trying to get these things we look at is like, oh, that's good. Or our body, we want to be thin and popular. Or we look for a compensator. I might be getting these two mixed up. Or we look for ways to escape, which could be eating. It could be drugs or alcohol when they're older. So I think this connection that we have, with our kids is so important to keep them healthy. Because if that's missing, they may start, and no parent intentionally does this on purpose. It just can happen. Even you think you're connected, but you don't really know. And it's just, for me, it's been really important to always talk to my kids. And, I don't know, when they become teenagers, hopefully they'll come talk to me so I can help guide them. And I think, so far, my daughter has already come and told me things I'm not sure other kids would tell their parents, because it's just so important to me that we have that connection, and that she feels she's, accepted, that, she's not going to get in trouble, that we all make mistakes, and I want to be able to help her with her problems, So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think too, kids go through phases and, they're very attentive to their parents, and then they're not, and then they come back around I just posted on my Facebook page a picture of my second daughter's back at school swimming. They had to go back to college early to swim, and she keeps texting me pictures of her meals that she is having to shop for the food on her own, having to prepare the food on her own because the dorm and the campus are basically closed. I mean, her room is open for her, but the campus is closed, so there's no food services there. And I just think I saw this last night, this little, like the third picture she sent to me of her food, and it's balanced, it's healthy, and I thought, they really do come around. All that foundation that you lay early on, and you're persistent and consistent with it, a lot of times they do come around. And but again, I would say that I was always very conscious. Working in the field I work, I was always very conscious about helping my children develop a healthy perspective and relationship with food. One of the things that you talk about in the book, you do mention intuitive eating. And I think for my listeners, some might be confused between the difference, or is there even a difference between mindful eating and intuitive eating?
Mindful eating is really just paying attention while you're eating, using mindfulness while you're eating without judgment. So the judgment part is the hard part, because once we're judging something, we're not mindful, we're not aware, we're not in that. So that's really mindful eating. There'll be some different definitions. Mindful eating is involved in intuitive eating, but intuitive eating is a little bit bigger. And it's, Evelyn Tribble and Elise Resch, it's their definition, and now we have an intuitive eating scale and research Tracy Tilka developed. So they have these principles, but they're based on three things: permission to eat, unconditional permission to eat food. So you can eat anything you want, using physical instead of emotional reasons to eat, and letting hunger and fullness guide your eating. Those are kind of the three principles, but then they have 10. If you read their book, you can really so it's really just kind of more eating based on those internal cues and trusting yourself to make good food decisions instead of outside rules. So mindful eating is really a part of intuitive eating. Mindful is just being mindful, being aware when you're eating, what the food tastes like, not judging it and paying attention, instead of just eating really fast or reading while you're eating, or thinking, you're really focused on the food. So I use those. I talk about intuitive eating because of the research. There's so much research that they have that's positive, and they're doing it with adolescents and younger ages. There's also Ellen Satter's Eating Competence, which is similar. There are mindful eating, intuitive eating, and Ellen Satter's Eating they're all internal approaches. They're based on trusting hunger and fullness. Ellen Satter is really one key difference is providing reliable meals. It's structuring meals. She's big on she adds that into her definition, but it's also having a relaxed attitude about food. But so I think they're all similar, and how I talk about in the book is these are just internal approaches. Focusing instead of on portion control and having to eat a certain amount, following any kind of rule, low fat, or the internal approaches are a great way to regulate your food intake. And that's really key for being at the right weight for you. When we don't regulate our food intake, or our kids don't, they either eat too little or too much for their body type. So each kid's going to regulate differently, and the problem is we tend to look at weight to say, oh, that kid is average weight, they're regulating their food intake, where they may not be. They probably are more than, that can give you a clue, but it's some kids are bigger and they're regulating their food intake. And then a parent might say, but my kid's technically overweight. But so they'll start like not letting them have seconds. Then they can't regulate their food intake because they're not allowed to eat till they're full. And so it becomes this, the internal approaches are the best way to really regulate our food intake. Of course, providing a variety of food, you're not eating fried food at every meal, but most people that sit down, pay attention and plan a meal, they're going to plan, a balanced meal. Nutrition plays a role. This book is not really focused on the food part. I think if you have all these and you feel good about these principles, that's a great time to focus on the food, but I wouldn't focus on the food first. I'd focus on there's a lot of resources focusing on food, so I talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Of course, the flexible sweets or goodies policy is just about, having a reliable way that your kids know that you have sweets around. So they, my kids know usually once a day. Sometimes we skip it. They might forget. They usually don't. My son will forget, my daughter, but sometimes they forget. And, some days we have more than one. If there's a party, it's a weekend, but I'm always sending them reminders. Kind of like what you said, you plant these seeds and, they don't always follow it, but sometimes I'll hear my daughter talk about food and like, wow, you are listening, I guess.
But, they do.
So yeah, the intuitive eating, all that, really the way I look at it is just, it's you're relying on your body, hunger and fullness to guide eating. I think it's just a lot smarter way to eat in our world.
Right.
With food everywhere. I think that's how we ate before nutrition became, people sat down, ate a meal.
And they didn't think about it so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't. Food wasn't around for them to just like eat and do, snack all the time. And then they came. So I think this is how we've eaten since we've had, since food has become the industrial revolution. The food had changed, but for the most part, for most of the time, we sat down and ate meals. We paid attention. It was social. We ate with people, and then. So I think that's really the most
complicated.
Important. Yeah, it is less complicated. Yeah.
So, listening to your body is a key concept to being mindful, and as we sort of talked about before we started the show, I find this comes up all the time in my work, and my general observation is that parents aren't really sure how to go about teaching their children how to listen to their bodies. So what are your suggestions for doing this?
I think, first of all, the structure a meal. So, sitting at the table. There is something called intake coaching, that some of the research. And so this is using language, like in one study, I think with Head Start, they noticed that there was no reference. There was a lot of like, do you want more food instead of, are you full? What is one of my catchphrases? What does your tummy say? When, my kids will like imitate their tummy. So I think Margaret Fletcher, who wrote the book, Discover Mindful Eating for Kids, she would have her kids do, and that's in the book, do this dance before they decide, this tummy dance to decide how full they were before they took the food, serving it family style. And so then the kids put as much as they think they're hungry for, they can always go back for more. Both you and I recommend the family style meals. I think that's a really nice way. Always encouraging kids to, you don't want them to take like all this food and they're not going to be able to eat it and then it's wasted. So I always encourage them to take less. And they can always get more. But yeah, I think it's using that language, talking to the reminders, like if we go to a party, there's more grazing and I know we're going to have dinner, or there's a meal, I'm always like, remember don't spoil your appetite,
right.
Just eat enough to, so that you really enjoy your food. And so I think it's all these, and then it's letting them eat till they're full. And if you haven't been doing that, they might make mistakes and maybe they'll get a stomach ache, and then and then again, there's remember next time, or you can talk to them, they're going to make mistakes, even if even my kids do. Sometimes they don't eat enough and they're hungry. And those are all learning opportunities, and letting your kid know these are, they shouldn't get in trouble or be scolded. It's just, that's how they learn. They learn best when it's kind of a natural consequence versus always us trying to prevent, oh, he's going to get a tummy ache if he eats too many sweets. Well, just let him eat too many and he'll
Right.
find out. And it can be hard for parents, especially really health-focused parents.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that always works best when my kids have natural consequences versus imposed consequences.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it's the language, and it's just reminders, and it's letting kids eat till they're full, and role modeling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm full, I'm done. So
Good.
I think
Good stuff. Yeah, it's I like the preparing them for what lies ahead. I think that helps a lot too, and reminding them what they've been, what they have had, if it's a sweet or something, and knowing that you're going to a party and there's going to be more. And I always had the policy with my kids that when we had a party, there was just no way I was going to weigh in on how they were eating or what they were choosing to eat. To me, a party is a party, and that's not your normal day-to-day thing. And that seemed to work well with my kids. So a little bit of a change of topic. I want to talk about, you mentioned in the book, turning up the focus on food. And I want to explore that a little bit. I've been binge watching This Is Us. Have you heard of that show on NBC? It's season 1. I didn't get to see much of it.
I want to watch it because I think, is it like Parenthood? Did you watch
Yes.
Parenthood?
Yes,
Yeah,
it is
and we love that.
Yeah,
So I saw that and I'm like, that's Parenthood.
Yes, it's very good. And I binge watched it over the holidays. And there's a character in the show named Kate, and she's very, very overweight. And there are a lot of themes that circle her character, but obviously one of them is her weight and how she goes about managing it. And then this first season, you really get to learn and see her growing up as a bigger child, and as living as a larger adult. And one of the episodes highlights this issue of, and this is the food framework issue that you refer to in the book. It highlights this issue of eating what you think you should be eating versus what you really want to eat, and how that, in this episode particularly, it plays out later with this character where she stops at a gas station and has a big binge eating, powdered sugar donut eating session. So you do talk about this just a little bit. You hint around to this when you talk about turning up the focus on food. And can we talk, I'd like you to sort of explain to the listeners what you mean by that, and what sort of this whole restrictive, rewarding, making food sort of taboo versus highly valuable. What does that do in terms of children and their eating and their mindfulness around eating?
Well, I think a key thing, especially like this gal, when you have a weight problem or you're trying to lose weight, or, and I used to see this when I work with adults. These adults would have no problem with food. They said, I had no problem eating until I turned 40 and I gained weight. And then they started to diet. And then they started to restrict. Before they ate what they want, not saying that they maybe weren't health conscious, like, they're eating what you want and considering health. That's how I eat. Some people, but the reason that all of a sudden they were out of control of eating, they had never been out of control before, was that now they were restricting. They weren't allowing it's our tendency with the food framework. I'm going to cut out all the sweets, all the, food that isn't nutritious. And when we do that, it's in our brain, because even though it's something we're not supposed to do, it's always on our mind that we shouldn't be eating it. And even if we want to have it, we can't have it. And that just adds even more desire. So the problem with the advice that's given is always eat healthy, make the healthy choice, have fruit instead of, well, what if you don't want fruit? So after, for a while, that's fine. Yeah, fruit's good. But one time you're going to want the chocolate cake. And when you finally do eat it, since you haven't had it in so long, then you're going to feel out of control. And then it kind of starts that cycle. So I think with someone who's been dieting and restricting from a young age, if she has been in the show, I'm not sure, that's really pronounced. That's just a way that is in the thinking of people. If they have been restricting their eating, going on and off, losing weight, gaining weight, they probably think about food a lot, because they're trying not to eat and then they finally give in. That's kind of our willpower. I'm actually working on an article on that right now. Our willpower way of thinking that we need to use our will, and we stay away from it and we feel good and we're like, I've conquered this, but then eventually we eat it and then we can't control ourselves. Versus really just asking yourself, what do I want to eat? How does food make me feel? Because, nutritious food does make you feel good. So for myself, when I made that switch to more intuitive eating style, I used to be out of control with eating too. And I thought about food all the time. Once I let that go and gave myself permission, I actually ate really well because I realized I like to eat nutritious food. It's not, before it was something I felt I had to do all the time. Once I took that pressure off, I stopped thinking about food that I would eat and I'd forget about it until, So I think it's that anything you're obsessed with or focused on, it's in your brain more. Like you get a blue car, then you see everyone has a blue car, or you start a podcast and everyone's, so that's normal, but it's also normal for things that we feel we shouldn't do. So if I tell myself, I can't check social media because it's not helping me at work, all I think about. Instead, I kind of try and, what I'm trying to do is check it in the morning and at night. And when I feel like checking it, I tell myself, what do I can check it if I want. It's not a strict rule. So I try and stay away from that so I don't even want it even more, Right. So I think it's just our brain's way of whatever we think about, whether it's something we're not supposed to do or something we think we should do. It's in our brain. And
so it's more of a psychological basis. And I'll just play devil's advocate here because I'm sure there's going to be a parent out there listening who's going to say, well, my kid would, I can say, yeah, I can process this and say, okay, I'm just going to let my child eat whatever he wants to eat so he can be mindful. But what if he only wants to eat unhealthy food all the time? And what if he hates fruits and vegetables and he's never going to eat those foods?
Well, the problem with that is the parent's still in charge of, the division of responsibilities. You're still providing the food, you're still structuring the meals. But once you serve that food, then it's up to the kid, And I do try and have those sweets or something like once a week so they can have as much as they want. Not all parents and there's no like one strict rule. I have some parents I've talked to who they decide just like one sweet a week or two is all, and it works for their family. So that's what in the book I have, try different ways of dealing with these foods, but eventually your child is going to be out in the world. They're going to be making their own decisions. And if it's all controlled by you, it may be hard for them, once they get out in the real world. So if, and that's something with one of the mom that I cried with that I told you, she knew she tried to let her child, and she had structured eating and eat everything, what he wanted. He didn't have weight issues at all. And it didn't work. They did a year and it didn't work, but there was other things. Again, that's one part, there were other things going on, but she knew that didn't work because even though at home it was okay and she controlled, at school he was pestering people. He was, all this stuff. So, in the end, it's really just controlling your child's eating is just it's not a long-term solution. It can be, It can work, not all parents are ready to go down that road and that's okay. And, but in the end, we have to realize some kids do find eating more rewarding than other kids. And, some kid may have a problem. They may not turn to food. They may turn to something else. So those kids that find food rewarding, we just might have to spend more time with them, do more intake coaching, spend more time. They might have a temperament that's a little harder to connect. We know temperament is related to weight. Kids that are, and it could have started they were crying as a baby. So maybe we use food. There's a lot of different, my son was really hard baby. And he ate a lot those first 3 years. And, I had to find ways to connect with him and all the discipline. And, I tried that and it did not work. It just, he behaved worse when I would discipline him, and this harsh discipline I just knew. And that's when I started looking into parenting more. And, now he's 7 and like, I'm so glad that we didn't keep going that route, because he would be a terror And I had to find a different way to relate to him. And so I think each kid is different, and you may have challenges with eating with one kid, but they're, you have to think, is what you're doing working? If it's not working, if it's working, great, and everyone's happy. But if it's not working, we have to consider some, different strategies.
Sure. And I think, you make a really good point. And sometimes I find that I have to remind the parents that I'm working with or talking with that I have to empower them. Like, you can say no to certain foods. You do not have to serve a meal that is completely pleasing to that one child who happens to have a short list of food preferences. There are so many challenges out there that parents face, but there is a lot of empowerment in parenting and in food parenting that also goes with a lot of this stuff too.
Yeah.
Okay. You talk about, and you've hinted and you've mentioned, a flexible food policy. What is that, and how can it help parents actually work to help their children self-regulate eating sweets?
Well, I think it helps, and it all depends. Every family's different. If you have no problems in that area and you don't really have, you don't have to create something. But if you notice your kids are kind of fixated on these foods, or, part of the reason kids fixate is, first of all, they love these foods. They're energy dense. We know carbohydrates in general are involved in growth. So there's a reason kids do like carbohydrate rich foods. And studies show that kids growing have sweeter preferences than kids that aren't growing as fast. So we should know that it's normal, that our kid's going to like, sweets, and they're also easy to like, and they fill up easily. So I think one of the problems, if a kid doesn't know when they're going to get it again, then when they eat it, it's like they're eating it because they don't know, like, it could be a week if it's inconsistent and all over. So, it's nice if you can say, look, we have sweets, once a day, or we have it a few times a week. And some of my readers have developed, they have it on the weekend, and then they pick Wednesday, and then kids will have them outside the home too. But it just helps kids kind of know what to expect, that they're going to get sweets again. And that's the language I use if I say no, no, I don't think you should have cookies because we have ice cream planned for dessert tonight. That's different than, saying, why do you always want cookies? Again, bringing the attention to those sweets. Instead, it's like, look, we're not having them now because we're going to have something later. Kid usually accepts that a lot better. So I think it's helped, and Ellen Satter has her dessert with dinner. I think that's really great with toddlers. Mm-hmm. That, I did that for a while, but then it was like I didn't want to always have dessert out there. And my daughter just, after a while, she's like, wait a second.
This is not a meal.
She's like, wait, so we're always eating a small meal. It's always my daughter who's like questioning things. But now we have our usually once a day. It's really not, it's not a big deal. This holiday season felt like we were in cookie land every.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. I have never served dessert with dinner, and I was raised that way too. My mother never served dessert. We hardly ever had dessert, and I didn't feel deprived. I mean, I can also tell you the story that she would buy one pack of Oreo cookies every week, and we would demolish it, 4 kids in one day, and she would say, "Well, I'm not getting any more cookies until next week." It was like, if you eat them all, this is it. But because I never had regular desserts, I don't serve regular desserts in my house either. Mm-hmm. And that allows me to be a little bit more flexible if they want something after school that's a sweet. It's kind of like, well, yeah, I'm not serving it any other time today, so sure, I don't, And I'm very flexible with the sweets too, and I find that my kids do not overindulge. They indulge like any other kid, but they're not focused and overindulging on them. Again, I think whatever works for your kids' personalities, I think Leslie Schilling, another dietitian, she has said in the past, or I've read a quote from her that says, if food is a big deal, then food is a big deal. If you make it a big deal, it is a big deal. Which takes me to one of our last questions, and that's this concept of focusing on health and the health qualities of food versus focusing on the enjoyment of eating food. So many families worry, about their children's health, and they worry a lot about healthy food choices and healthy eating, and they really focus on capturing that health quality first, and then they figure that the enjoyment of eating will just sort of automatically flow from that. But that's not really the case for most kids. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that kids and adults too, but kids in particular are focused, they really care about satisfying eating experiences. So that's what they care about. And it's not that they won't care about nutrition as they get older. And I think it's a gradual thing. And I think each child is different, but that's what when they're sitting down, and this is, I think, a lot of adults too. And that's why the problem with our advice that's so all about eat this, not that. But when you sit down, you want to enjoy your food. So I think it's better, especially when kids are young, have this food available, make it taste good, and nutritious and everything. But overly focusing on the health benefits of the food may, turn kids off. And that study with the crackers that's in the book that when I wrote for the New York Times too, is when kids were read a story about how these crackers were healthy, they ate less crackers than when they were told it was tasty, but they actually ate the most crackers when they were told nothing. So I think that, it's nice to make food enjoyable. It tastes good. Overly focusing on the health when kids are too young, I think is, then they'll naturally eat foods because they enjoy it. Like my son likes nuts because he likes nuts, not because they're a healthy fat, So, but as he's only 7, but he really does have an interest. They've done some nutrition in first grade. And he's really into, even though he's my pickiest eater, I really think he likes sports. He's very interested in how the body works. And that comes from him, like what's in this, and he's also interested in how other things work. But so I think that's important. We can give them, some messages about nutrition and health. But if we're serving, like how in Fearless Feeding, most of the food is nutritious. We have, like the 80-20, then as they get older and more interested, we can talk to them about how food makes their body feel. I think that's more, they need to have that internal motivation to eat. I mean, that's really everywhere now with motivational interviewing, that we can't just tell kids what to do and think they're going to do it. They're not.
Right. And a lot of them will do the opposite.
Yeah. So it's got to come from them. And I remember the time I didn't grow up with nutrition being a big deal. There was pros and cons to my upbringing. But with the sweets, it would be like there was 5 of us. So once it came in the house, it'd be gone. My brothers were older, like going through puberty when I was still young. And so I grew up with that mentality, like if there were sweets, I have to eat it because someone might take it away. And my friend Marissa, I would go to her house and there'd be ice cream in there. I'm like, did you know you have ice cream in your fridge? And she'd be like, yeah. I'm like, don't you want to eat it? And she's like, so yeah, that was my history. But I think I lost. What was I talking about?
You were talking about health versus food enjoyment, and really how we talk about nutrition and health for kids.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not motivating to talk about it, but you want to find ways to internally motivate your child. Yeah.
So for me, when I started working out after high school, I really changed my diet. I'm like, wow, this gives me all this energy. And that was my hook. And so as parents, we want our kids to have that when they're 4 years old. We want them to choose the broccoli, but that's just not, they're going to have to find their hook, and you can help guide them into their hook, but you can't, I think we have unrealistic expectations of what they're kids, and,
right.
And that doesn't mean they can't eat, nutritious foods and love it, but every kid's different. And just because, my son, like I said, he doesn't particularly love fruits and fruit even, like he loves smoothies. He likes it in food. But I have no doubts that he's going to take care of himself as an adult. And that's interesting. Even with learning, he's had learning challenges, but I have no doubts he's going to be successful just because he's got this kind of drive. And so we're always so focused on what kids do instead of, like this book is all about, focus on their relationship with food, make it healthy, and then they will do the doing that we want. We can't focus on the doing first. Right. So I think that's probably a mistake we all make at times, even me sometimes. I get focused on what they're eating. And they're always eating better when I'm not focused on that, which is most of the time. But I do have certain times where, I'm human and I'm a dietitian at heart. And so yeah, I mean.
Yeah, it is. They do come around I feel the same way. It's really not focusing on what they're doing in the moment, but focusing on cultivating who they are. And, you've done such a nice job in this book in terms of outlining, the core principles for helping parents cultivate that mindful eater, that awareness and that sensibility with eating that will carry them down the road into the future. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. It's a long childhood. You have a lot of time to build all this within your child. Now, my last question for you, Maryann, is if a parent is hip deep in the food framework and they really haven't done much at all with raising a mindful eater, how could they use your book and where should they start?
I would, look at the table of contents. I mean, I would start with the introduction and the first chapter. I don't have it labeled as a chapter. And to really think about it. I know, one of I had people read it before, and she's taking she read through the whole book, and there was a lot of ahas for her. She's taken the one that's most challenging. So you might want to read through it and then really go back to the principle that's most challenging. If you need additional help, I think there's all different types of families out there. I mean, some families, if the child's growing fast and you really need that professional help. Books are great if you're kind of in that middle or you're preventing, and the book can still help you. But I definitely, finding a dietitian or getting some support, if your child's really acting up with food, I think you need that, Jill, and I think you can attest to that. That people need support. But yeah, I would, start with the most challenging, and there's additional resources if you want to find out more. And I think this is for adults. I always struggle with this a little. All these principles work for adults too. And it's really important that we're doing, all the research shows we got to do healthy habits together as a family. It's not just about focusing on our kid. And so if you as an adult find one of the principles or you think about your upbringing and, work on it yourself. That can go a long way. When you have a healthier relationship with food, your child's more likely to. And there are resources in the back some are kid-centric and some are adult-centric.
Well, when I read through the book, it brought two childhood scenarios to mind for me. And one of them was the day I found my mother's stash of M&Ms, which she hid from all of us. And as a parent, I can't blame her because we were 4 kids that were attacking any sweets that came into the house. And she hid her peanut M&Ms in her underwear drawer. And I remember the day I found it and I was like, these must be just priceless because she's hidden them in the back under all her underwear. And
That's funny.
It is funny. And then the other realization, and I've had this realization a long time ago, but it brought it to mind again, is I talk about this. I was raised, my parents were German, and I was raised with the authoritarian clean your plate. And so one of my biggest challenges still today as an adult is the ability to walk away from a plate that still has food on it. That is a personal challenge for me. And I've worked really hard with my kids. All my kids can walk away from a plate and leave food. And I could not do that. I still work with that. So I think that as a parent, that is such a great point, is that your book is not just for the child in the family. It really is valuable for the parent to also sort of look through and see what rings true? What's causing a little discomfort? What's bringing up some old memories? What is the aha moment? Because that's what it did for me. I was like, wow, I forgot about this stuff. But as I was reading through it reminded me. So where can listeners get your book, and where can they find you? What sort of resources do you have for them that you'd like them to know about?
Well, they can find all my books right now are exclusively on Amazon. So you can go to Amazon. You'll find How to Raise a Mindful Eater. There's an ebook and a print book. I'll probably be coming out with workbook editions, which I think will be nice for this. And it's really just will be additional pages people can write in and questions. I do have questions at the putting it all together so that people can, if they're having trouble, they can ask themselves questions and that can trigger, help them find answers. I also have from Picky to Powerful, now I have a print version and an ebook for picky eaters. And it's pretty straightforward. It talks about normal versus, problematic if you need help. Just some really helpful tips, inspiring stories from parents that have gone through picky eating. And then I have my What to Cook for Dinner with Kids is all about meal planning, simplifying, getting a rotation of meals and tips for feeding and having kids help in the kitchen. Then we have Fearless Feeding, which is really, I think, a great resource for all ages if you want to know development and nutrition for each age. So that book is, I'm always recommending, if you want to break down the nutrition, understand the development, so at all ages, so that book can last a long time. And then, my site is, MaryannJacobsen.com. It also Raise Healthy Eaters. Well, if you put that in, that'll bring you, I recently switched to my name, but I still talk about the same stuff and a little bit more now. And you can sign up for my newsletter. I have a free offer coming up either today or tomorrow. So if you're interested in that. And then I am going to start a podcast. I've been saying this. My New Year's resolution is not to procrastinate. So I tend to I get these ideas and then it's find myself not doing them. But the healthy mindset, and that's really focusing on, that's actually the topic for my next research-based book is really looking into the different ways of looking at health that makes us healthier. It's not just what we do, but how we think about what we do. So
great.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have you on.
Hey, I would love to be on, and I was going to ask you what's your next book topic going to be. So I'm glad to hear that that's something you're already noodling about.
Yeah, that's my research. I'm going to do some smaller things in between. But yeah, that's a research-based book. I realize it just takes so much out of you that you can't just, you got to do some funner things. Yeah. I totally get that. So thank you so much, Maryann, for being on the show today. It was a great review of your book, and I wish you the best success for it. Okay, folks, that's a wrap. I hope you liked the show. I hope you enjoyed Maryann's insight and her wise, up-to-date information about how to raise a mindful eater. And I have reviewed her book, and it's chock full with the latest research. So it's definitely something you want to get your hands on and use as a reference. Certainly read it now, but have it on hand in the future should you feel yourself getting off track with feeding or with all the 8 principles of raising a mindful eater. You can have her book on hand to refer to and help yourself get back on track. Don't forget to join me on the 7th or 9th of March for my free training. Head over to my website or watch your email for the details. I hope you enjoyed the show today. You can help other parents learn about the show and help the Nourished Child podcast grow. You can write a review on iTunes. You just head over to iTunes, click on the icon, The Nourished Child. By the way, I do have a new logo, so it's a fun little colorful kid-friendly logo. You click on that, and you will see a blue button that says Review. And if you click on that, it'll take you right to the area where you can write a review about the podcast. You can also subscribe to the show. When you do that, you will get an automatic update every time a new show is aired on your iPhone or Android phone. I'm also on Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, Tuned In, and more.
Share the podcast if you can on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, wherever you hang out. It all helps me get the word out about the show and helps more parents understand and learn about childhood nutrition. As always, thank you very much for joining me today on the show. Grab the child in your life, big or small, and give them a big squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child, inside and out.